All right, welcome to the Kiali and Jaeger Sprint 42 sprint demo. I'm going to go through briefly just a few things today. There's not that much. We've got a summer schedule, a lot of people on holidays, but let's get into it. So as always, we run our sprints using a Kanban board style via GitHub. It's available for anyone to look at any time. One small change in the way we do things in this most recent sprint, we've created another column that holds just epics because the epics tend to carry over from sprint to sprint. We didn't want them in the other columns. It's a little bit easier to call out the larger items that we're working on cross sprints. So just something to look for if you happen to be looking at this view of things. Here's the GitHub project's URL. Should be easy to find. And we'll go into some highlights of features that have been added. In the workload details view, you've got the logs tab. For the last few sprints, we've been making some changes here to make it more powerful to use. And in this sprint, what we've done is we've taken the show and hide, which is a way to filter your logs such that you can only show only the things that you want to see, or you hide things you don't want to see. We've added regex power to that now, so if you want to do, instead of a strict substring, you want to do a regex search for either one of those things, you can activate that now. And then additionally, you can copy to the clipboard by just clicking on this icon here, and then capture whatever logs. Those are the filter logs that you're capturing. So after you do your show or hide, you can then clip and paste it to whatever you want to save it in. That's a nice feature. Other improvements across the product and documentation. We introduced version documentation at kiali.io recently. This is just to say that we are now including the FAQ, the FAQ, in the versioning. We've added some FAQ entries, including one that's pretty useful for token generation. Last sprint, we introduced a new authorization strategy for OpenID, which has already been getting some use, and as such, a couple of issues that popped up in the initial impl, which we've been fixing in this sprint. So hopefully in today's release later, the OpenID stuff will be working as expected for all the folks trying to use it. And then on the dev side, with Glide, on the server side and the Go side, we've changed the way we were handling our dependency management, replacing Glide with the more popular and Go modules. We have a lot of stuff in progress, so actually the next sprint demo will probably be showing a few more things than this one. Again, it has to do a little bit with scheduling and vacations and so forth, but just to let you know what's been going on in this sprint and probably will be seen as a full feature coming up soon. We've got in-graph tracing, which is going to be a way to see traces and trace spans on top of the existing graph. We're making a big push towards configurable thresholds for health, which means that in the past, you basically using fixed thresholds to determine whether something is degraded or failing traffic-wise. This will add a lot more power, allowing you to configure things as needed if you need to override those defaults. We continue to always do work in the Kiali operator as that technology sort of iterates and improves. One nice thing will be improved reconciliation and change detection, so that the operator will pick up more changes in the environment and be able to reconcile against those. And then we'll be introducing the new OLM bundle format. From a configuration features perspective, sidecar injection is underway, so being able to manage that through Kiali Management Console is also coming. So all of these things have been in progress during this sprint, and will be coming to fruition soon. I'm going to hand it over to Gary Brown to talk about the Jaeger highlights for this sprint.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, as with the previous sprints and a couple more sprints, one of our main focuses is on the OpenTelemetry project. And so as part of that, we've been doing some optimizations by making the Elasticsearch storage exporter use the native OpenTelemetry format, doing some improvements on how retries are handled and batches. Also added some bearer token support. There'll be more added in the coming sprint. And also we've been starting work on part of the solution to support aggregated trace support, because at the moment spans are reported to the backends as as individual spans, but generally some of the processing you want to do is actually based on the whole trace. So this work is going to group the traces, the spans by trace, and then allow other processing to happen, like tail-based sampling or maybe some analytics tasks. We've also been doing some work on local storage. At the moment, the project has support for a storage called Badger, which has had a few issues and usability problems. So we wanted to explore different alternatives that may be out there. Unfortunately, there's no ideal solution at the moment, and there's also some new fixes coming in with Badger. So we'll be looking to see if those address at least some of the issues that we've been having. And then finally, some work on service CA certificates in OpenShift. Okay, back to you, Jay.
Thanks, Gary. And to finish up, we do have one new feature to demo today that will be coming in today's release. It's called Operation Nodes in the Graph, and it has to do with a new feature that was introduced in Istio 1.6 as an experimental feature. So it should be probably a full-fledged feature in 1.7 called Request Classification. It has to do with the ability to look at incoming requests into the services, and based on characteristics of the request, aggregate on those characteristics. So it's basically a way to kind of in a more granular way look at the traffic that's coming into a service, and then be able to look at it and inspect it in ways that you're already familiar with in Kiali. And then with that information, you could potentially say, oh, maybe I should be splitting this service into multiple services, maybe I should be consolidating services, or you could just be gathering information about requests and responses, about how that service is being utilized by its clients. There's a new feature in Kiali.io in the feature section describing this, and it also links to the Istio feature as well. So let me see if I can get to that demo. All right. So what you see here is a travel demo that we have, and I'm not showing any operations nodes. This is just the way it would normally look today if you were looking at an app graph with services injected. And you're basically, in this demo, you've got these travel portals based on cities, and they're making requests to the travel service, which routes it to the travel app or the travel back and workloads. And then that travel service goes out and gets reservations or quotes for cars and insurance and flights and hotels and so forth. So that's the way the normal flow goes. But let's say we're interested in a little bit more about how the travel service is actually being called, and maybe how some of these other reservation services are being called. So now in the display dropdown, there is something new called Operation Nodes. And there's a blurb here to explain a little bit more about it, but I'm just going to tell you so you don't have to read it. So let me turn those on. Let's inject operation nodes into the graph. All right, so as we can see in the legend, there's a new node shape, which is the pentagon, which is going to be our operation. Or we see those in the graph. These are our new custom aggregates. So you do have to, this doesn't come out of the box. You have to do a little bit of configuration to make this happen because you have to add the operation information to the Istio metrics, and you have to then configure it such that you get the buckets or the aggregations or the operations that you want. So in this case, we wanted to know if the travels service, it really performs two main things. You could ask it for a travel quote, or you could just ask it to list cities that it knows how to deal with. And if we wanted to see more specifically how each of those things was being called, we now can do that. We can click directly on travel quote and find out information just about the travel service, but only when it's being called for travel quoting. And there's full edge and node side detail, side panel support for that. Also, something that's kind of interesting is, let's say Travels now makes a request for car reservation. We can see that this service knows how to handle standard requests for cars, but also VIP requests for cars. This is another thing that's sort of interesting, is that you can have the same operations on multiple services. So not only do we have this breakdown for cars, but we also are doing it for hotels. So you'll see these duplicated because each of them is going to be gathering that information. What's interesting about that is if you take away the service nodes, they'll get combined into, so you've got a total aggregation of VIP traffic that's going to hotels or cars, and then standard in the same way. So you can really start to get an idea of what's going on in a variety of ways with these additional aggregations for operations. There's also, as you would expect, like the full drill down capability and so forth. So that is a quick introduction into what you can do with request operations using the new classification stuff in Istio 1.6. Let me go back to here, and that is actually it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next sprint.